How do you think Scripture prioritizes these? I mean, it has stuff to say about all of them, for sure.
Well, I think we have an obligation through tithing. I think that takes some priority.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty clear in Bible giving is the first fruits, which means it's the first thing you do when your income comes. And again, in Bible, in Old Testament in particular, kind of like talking about flocks and herds being your portfolio. Your crops were your income, right? What you could grow, and it's pretty clear that as the first fruits, you hear the word fruit in there. The giving comes first. Yeah. What do you think comes next for the rest of them?
I would submit that taking care of your family and those you're responsible for, anyone who does not take care of his family is worse than an unbeliever.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the second.
Where do you think that would fit under these 5?
Well.
It's not a trick question. I'm actually.
No, well, yeah, because I'm not necessarily agreeing with your 5 slices there.
Okay. So what would you have a 6th one?
No, I would. The number's not particularly important, but in terms of a priority, whether taking care of your family and those you're responsible for it, whether that goes under living, some portion of that's living, some portion of that's savings, some portion of that is taxes, so you don't get thrown. I mean. Yeah. So it's a different model.
No, well, I agree with you. I do think taking care of those you're responsible for, part of that is under living expenses and part of that's under saving, for sure. And then as far as taxes and debt being legal obligations, Jesus is really clear, pay your taxes. That's not really optional for us living in the world that we live in. So in terms of caring for your family so you don't get thrown in jail, as well as just the moral obligation to pay your taxes, that's a part of it too. But I think caring for yourself and caring for those who depend on you is included in at least both the savings and the living expenses. So I would posit that when you're deciding how much to save and how much to spend on living expenses, that should be an element in the decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, again, I'm just not necessarily agreeing with your model, but you're fitting what I'm saying into your model as opposed to hearing something that I'm not saying.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. So I would just say that I agree with you that, there's a scriptural mandate to care for those who depend on you. But does that mean if you're, if someone's paycheck is $5,000 a month, they need to go spend $6,000 a month because that's caring for their family? Probably not. Because the priority needs to be figuring out how to care for those who depend on you within your means, right? So I guess that's how I would fit that in, if that makes sense. So the interesting thing I would say about that and talking about how much comes in versus how much goes out is that the key to financial success in the long term really has, I don't want to say absolutely nothing because there are obviously limitations, but almost nothing to do with how big or small the income is. I work with clients who are, older retired people living on a fairly small fixed income, who are generous, take trips with their family, live very full lives. I also have clients who are actively employed, earning 7-figure incomes and living paycheck to paycheck with, $500,000 in debt. So as we see in the parable of the talents, we're all entrusted with different amounts to steward, which is fine, but the key to stewardship success as far as cash flow and preparing for long-term needs is the difference between what's coming in and what's going out. So in contrast to the world's priority, which generally tends to be when your income comes in, your living expenses are your top priority, maybe you meet your legal obligations, and then if there's anything left, you use the rest. For the scriptural perspective, I would encourage you to think of your expenses like this. Start with the income, subtract obligations, start with giving, that's pretty clear in Scripture. That comes out first. taxes and debt are legal obligations. Savings, we're going to come back to that because figuring out how much that needs to be is going to be different for everyone. And then whatever's left, that's what you have for living expenses. Kind of backwards from a typical approach, right? So this would be an example, right? You've got a $1,000 paycheck that comes in. Say you give $100, 200 of that is going to taxes. Again, for most of us, taxes, if you earn a paycheck, they get withheld from the paycheck. So you might not think of that as an expense, but it is, right? If you look at your gross paycheck versus how much you actually get in your checking account, it's different. Maybe, now the debt payment's gonna vary for everyone. If you have a mortgage or you're trying to pay down student loans or anything like that, you're gonna take that out. 10% for this sample is going to savings. So you've got $250 left for your living expenses out of that paycheck. And then any initial thoughts or reactions to that?
Who lives like that?
Who lives like that?
Yeah, I know, I mean, that's a serious observation, because if you've, done your savings, and your taxes are generally, and for most people on a paycheck, they're invisible to them, okay? So, and then you only have $250 or 25% of that left for your living expenses, which include housing and everything else.
There's the debt payments. Included.
Yeah, but housing gets put under living expenses as
Oh,
well.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a mortgage,
But the basic point is that for your living expenses, you're then left with 25%, or even, and anybody here with a mortgage that's less than 25% of their income, just the mortgage, less than 25% of their income, so.
well, these are just round numbers as an example.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is like a prototype for
No.
percentages. I would say probably if someone's 25% is going towards debt, that's probably the mortgage.
Yeah.
Right,
But
because
I guess my point
that's
is that-
very excessive otherwise.
This is really hard to do. That's, if anybody hasn't figured that out yet, it's really, really, really hard to
Yeah.
do, whether you're making a lot of money or a little money. It's just really hard.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's, for sure.
But if this is your guideline and you start young and you try, you're gonna be way better off than if you don't try. That's all it is. And none of us are gonna, even at retirement, gonna have it perfect, but.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, reactions? Yeah.
I would just say another initial reaction is that, so like when you do like a list format, you get some like prioritization for each one of, in my mind, I think, okay, I've gotta pay this first. But in some ways, like, I am trying to pay them all equally at the same time. Like that they all have the same almost prioritization weight, because I am trying to do all 5 buckets.
Sure, yeah.
And so I don't know, I struggle with that sometimes, of just kind of in my own planning about knowing, like, I'm wanting to do all 5 things at the same time, and so
Yeah.
I think sometimes the column format throws me off, where it's like, okay, I've got to give first, and then taxes, it's like, well, yes, I am going to give, and I still need to live.
Yeah.
It's
This
kind
is
of
more,
like
I would
you
encourage
fit
you
down a
to,
little bit, but-
I would encourage you to think of it more in terms of taking this as a way of calculating how much do I have for the living expense bucket. Because if you start with, if this sample person, obviously $1,000 is a fairly small paycheck, so, maybe they get this weekly, maybe, just as a sample though. If this sample person put living expenses at the top of their list, and they ended up being $500, then what's likely to happen? Well, likely they're gonna still pay their taxes and still pay their mortgage because they don't wanna lose their home and they don't wanna get thrown in jail. So, they spent $500 on the living expense as sort of the priority. Then they spent $450 on their legal obligations. They've got $50 left. Are they gonna give $50? Are they gonna save $50? Are they gonna give $25 and save $25? It basically, what what should have probably been at the top of the priority list, the giving, and then the caring for themselves and their family for the future, which is the saving, got just dropped because there wasn't enough left to do it, right? So that's why I would encourage you to think of this more. I recognize in real life we're all doing these simultaneously, of course, right? Because you got to pay the mortgage every month. Your taxes just come out automatically if you receive a paycheck. Savings may be more or less automated. If you've got a 401k, that may be partially automated as well. So in real life, we're doing them all simultaneously, but in terms of the priorities and figuring out how much goes to each one, that's where I would encourage the intentionality around the prioritization. So, I mean, these are really good thoughts and comments and objections. I appreciate it. What I would say, once you've started to think through your cash flow in this sample type of a way, that's when you start to need to ask questions like, okay, is this amount left over enough? Like, I think some of you just kind of like a knee-jerk reaction, like 25% of your paycheck for all your living expenses besides your home, like that's not enough. Okay, like that's fine. Like that could be an initial reaction as you start to think through these. You say that's not enough. And then, other questions that each person would need to ask as you start thinking through these is my giving where it should be? Am I saving enough for my future? What are my future goals? Am I saving enough for those, or do I need to make some changes? And it may be that as you think through this, you think, I need to make some adjustments. And the legal obligations of the debt and the taxes, I mean, there are strategic adjustments you can make for taxes, but again, that gets a little technical for this context. But, legal obligations, you're not going to be able to make too much adjustments. The Lord says to give, so if we're following his scriptural mandates there, that's not really optional either. So what can you adjust? Well, potentially you can make adjustments within the living expense bucket to take some things down so you have more for other things. That could be an option. If your cash flow is not allowing you to prioritize things like giving, saving, and paying your legal obligations, then living expenses are probably the area where you might need to make some tweaks. Another thing that you might have to consider that after a person look at this might have to consider is maybe the income number needs to go up. I mean, realistically, that can sometimes be a conclusion, right? I certainly experienced that myself in my own life. So, and at one point I realized I'm going to have to make some changes because I'm not, like, the income number was not high enough to be able to do things like save for my future. And I realized that needed to change. So I had to make some life adjustments. So sometimes for some people that might be one of the conclusions that they might have. And I do want to come back. Oh. I didn't know those were there. Okay. I'm going to skip through this because I don't. Which one is mine? I want to come back to the topic of saving and how much to save and how to save in a little bit because I've got a few thoughts about that I want to share with you guys, so I'm going to skip these. But just really quick, a few keys for thinking and working successfully around budgeting, around designating the different portions of your income towards these different categories. And this is specifically around living expense, just because that's the area where we have the most control and ability to make adjustments based on a plan for the money. So I know this is probably kind of small text, but the top one says budget together as a family. This is if you're a couple or you're in a family where you've got children who are old enough to have some understanding of what you're strategizing towards. Certainly, if you're a couple and that are working together on this, that's really key. You need to be on the same page. You need to talk about it. Don't forget necessary categories and be realistic on amounts. This one's really important. I think people, and I certainly include myself in this category, it's very easy to look at certain amounts and say, like, just as an example, I really like knitting, and I have a lot of yarn, and it's usually like high-end fancy yarn, so it is not cheap. And it's very easy for me to look at my yarn budget for the year and just be like, oh, maybe I'll spend, like $500. Like, that is very unrealistic. So it's important to be realistic about the amounts that you are spending, if you need to adjust it down, or just that you're planning for, so that you don't surprise yourself to the negative. Differentiate between monthly and non-monthly items. Budgeting for taxes is obviously pretty easy because that just gets taken out of your paycheck if you receive one. If you don't receive a paycheck, if you're retired or you're self-employed or other contexts like that where you have to plan ahead for taxes, that can be a non-monthly item as well, though. So it's going to be different for everyone. And the non-monthly ones are obviously a little harder to plan for because you have to be prepared for those. And then you must have some cash reserves to make a budget work. This is just, you don't want to have a situation where the fridge breaks and you have to go spend $3,000 and it just overthrows everything for the year, right? That's if the situation is that on edge, the budget's not going to work because, like I said, we know there's going to be something unexpected. We don't know the future. Using a debit card as opposed to a credit card. Obviously, this is more of a philosophical level. If you have a credit card, you pay off monthly and there's no problems there, then that's fine. But more just to encourage not spending cash that you don't have. Only keep in your spending account what you can afford to spend. This is, if you have a separate account, I'll show you kind of a little more of what I mean by that. That you're drawing your monthly expenses from. Just have what's in there, what's available. Give it time. That's, this isn't the type of, if you feel you need to make adjustments here, this isn't the kind of thing that you can do in 1 month or 2 months. Partly just you need to have some time so that you know realistically what your spending looks like and what your goals should be. This is just like a really simplified method of tracking expenses. Some people out there love spreadsheets. They love tracking every single receipt from every purchase every single day. I don't know if there's anyone in this room that does that because I usually find it's like 3% of people, so considering the number of people in here, we might have one of those. Most of us, and this includes me, even though I do love numbers and analysis, that sounds exhausting and torturous and intimidating. I have never done that, honestly, my entire life. If you're more the type who freezes up at the thought of putting every single receipt into a spreadsheet, like most of us, this sort of bucket approach may be helpful. This is very simplified. You're basically taking the income, you're putting it into several large buckets. Each one's for a different group of expenses. Savings is an automatic direct deposit for future goals. We'll come back to that in a second. The checking, let me see, I got a pointer here, yeah. Checking account number 1 is where your fixed expenses come out, so your mortgage, utilities, phone bill, insurance premiums, health care, all of that stuff that's fixed is going to auto pay out of there, and you have make sure there's enough in there to cover all that. And then the transfer into checking account 2 is for your more discretionary things. Now, obviously, you need to buy groceries, you need to buy gasoline, so some of that stuff is not optional, but the amount you spend may be a little more able to be adjusted, whereas your mortgage, your phone bill, you have to pay those every month, you know how much they are. So they require less planning towards potentially making adjustments. So checking account 2 is kind of the discretionary account where you pay those variable expenses from and where you're more able to make adjustments. Yeah?
Is it possible to go too far in this direction? Because my wife and I, we do about 15 accounts for this.
Oh.
Like seriously, like BCU was like, do you need another money market account? I'm like, yes. So, and
maybe you guys should use a spreadsheet.
That's, yeah.
I mean, I guess I would say if what works for each individual is going to be a little bit different. It might be that, I mean, essentially, we've all heard of the envelope system. Obviously, that's been popularized over the years, and this is some people have more envelopes than others, but I think the recommended amount, if you really want to kind of optimize it, is supposed to be like 5 or 6, something like that. That's what envelope system proponents would say. I would say there is something to be said for simplicity, but there's also something to be said for being aware of what's going where. So, I think finding the balance between those is going to have to be different for each person. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems to I know when I first started doing this, I was tracking every single thing and trying to enter all the taxes in the paycheck.
Yeah.
It just got so overwhelming that I just stopped doing it, and then I didn't know anything. But
Right.
if it was I really want to keep track of my coffee budget because I think I spend too much there, or
Yeah.
whatever, it's going to be actionable.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense to have that kind of data versus
Yeah.
how much did I spend on prescription medicines. For tax reasons, yes, but you're going to buy those things. You know what I mean?
Right.
It just
Right.
seems
That's not really an optional
the
expense.
detail if it's actionable detail.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. That's great. Yep.
On the previous slide, you had a note about assigning responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what you've seen work well? I'm assuming that's within a marriage.
Yeah. A lot of times, what I have observed is within a marriage, it's very common for one of the spouses to be more interested in all the details and the bookkeeping and all of that, and the other one to be very uninterested in that. It's not always, but that just I have observed that more often than not. And so I would say and it's sometimes also the case that one of them likes to spend money more than the other one does, and the other one is a little more security oriented, right? Not always, again, but I often have seen that. So I would say one key thing there is I always try to encourage, in my financial planning career, when I sit down with couples, I always want to have both of them there, if at all possible, even the one who's I hate this, because it is really important for them both to take equal responsibility just in terms of that. This is a joint effort here in terms of looking at your long-term trajectory. We want to make sure you're both involved. As far as assigning responsibility for manage, that could be as simple as for the practicalities of the record keeping and managing everything, keeping track of numbers. It could also be more of on a philosophical level, assigning responsibility so that they're both just really on board with the endeavor as a joint endeavor. And certainly if you have kids who are teens or, and old enough to maybe be aware of the family budget or contributing in some way to the family budget, then I think it becomes important to involve them in some of those decisions too, at least in the conversations, so that they're starting to learn, here's how we approach it, here's how we live out our stewardship mandate in our family, and here's how you can participate in that. Mm-hmm.
If I can sidetrack you for a minute, when I keep looking at your list, and I love it, is and I hear you use the phrase "those who are dependent on you." Is there a separate category for giving to those not dependent on you, adult children? Did your clients put that in living or?
No, that's a super good question.
How do you work with that?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So generosity towards family members, very, very complex field, and certainly an area that we do a lot with especially, maybe clients who are older, who are retired, who have a surplus, a lot of planning with that. I would say it can, I would probably put it under giving, with the caveat that is a different type of giving from the scriptural mandate of giving to the Lord's work, right? I mean, we see that, but then there is also certainly plenty in Scripture about supporting your family, but also, just the generous mindset that gives to those in need, whether or not it's specifically church related. So I would probably include giving to non-dependent family members, friends, etc., as in the giving category, but just sort of a subcategory from what we might call a tithe, which I kind of try to stay away from that word because the 10% model is, I mean, that's, I think it's a great model, it's a scriptural model, but it's also something that everyone has to listen to the Lord and go with their own conscience as far as the amount. It might be more than that. It could vary. I know we're gonna run out of time pretty soon here, but I want to really quick take a look at a couple things about. No, not that. Whoa. Uh-oh. Well, I dragged the slide into the wrong spot, but let me just really quick. These are, I recognize, very small as well. So not going to be able to see them super great. But I wanted to touch really briefly in a few remaining minutes on on saving and investing, and we can come back to this a little bit more next week too, because that's part of budget, right? When you look at these 5, we mentioned saving as one of the 5 things you can do with the dollar, and saving for future needs, future wants, goals, all of that is where investing comes into play. So when you think of investing, what do you think of? Like what is stocks and bonds? Yeah. People. Good. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times we think of the market. We think of, oh yeah, the last month has been kind of, a roller coaster, whatever. But really, when we think about investing, the culture focuses very much on sort of like, oh, that's how you get rich. That's, accumulate, you grow your portfolio. Of course, then there's also, oh no, my portfolio is down 50%, I'm destroyed. Like there's all this emotion and there's kind of a lot of drama around it. The Bible's perspective about building wealth is, again, it's that verse. Okay. This is Proverbs 13:11. I know, again, these are probably kind of hard to read. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. It's basically just saving, right? And investing is like a subcategory of saving. That verse from Proverbs 21:5, again, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as sure as haste leads to poverty. So again, saving, investing, it's about planning ahead, planning for the future, doing it little by little, not trying to get rich quick, not trying to shoot the moon, blow it out of the water, all of that, but just focusing on step by step working towards your goals. To take it back to this, I recognize this is really small. But what we have here basically is 6 steps as you, and what you do is work your way along this timeline. The first one is eliminate all high interest and short-term debt. So that's credit cards, car loans, small debt, not the mortgage necessarily. That's obviously a long-term one. That's different. Step 2, after eliminating all high interest and short-term debt, that's actually saving, by the way, in a certain sense, because you're getting a guaranteed return on the money you use to pay off debt, and it's actually very high, because if it's a short-term debt, your interest rate's probably pretty high. Step 2, keep 1 month's living expenses in an interest-bearing checking account. Step 3, 3 to 6 months of living expenses. This would be in a money market account, hopefully high yield, earning you some interest while it sits there. That's your reserves to, in case of an emergency, to protect your family, sudden job loss, sudden short-term disability, something like that. Step 4, saving for major purchases, using perhaps a money market account or some other higher interest paying savings account. This is for saving up for a car. Maybe you need to get a new couch or something else that's going to cost a few $1,000s, and potentially a home down payment if you're looking to eventually own a home and you don't right now. Step 5 is diversifying to meet long-term goals. This would be retirement, college tuition, maybe your daughter's wedding, a vacation home, big trip to Europe where you take the whole family, potentially starting your own business. So there's a lot of things you can save for that are long-term goals that are 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, depending on your time frame. Once you've done that, the final step here is more speculative investments, venture capital, private equity, partnerships, that sort of thing. This would be essentially like a surplus type of an investment. If the Lord's blessed you with more than you need and you're looking for longer term growth potentially, the goals, as you can see, as you move along in these sequence, become more and more expansive, more and more long term, and you're able to afford more risk as you move through those. I'm going to stop there for right now, and I'll jump back in with this next week and talk a little more about investing, because I know we're about out of time, and I want to continue the conversation. So what questions or comments or topics do you guys have? I know we have a few people here who are prepared to speak up and answer those, so maybe I'll hear from you guys first. Yes?
What's the big advantage to having a savings account that's bearing interest in addition to putting your money in some sort of IRA or something along those lines of saving? Maybe I'm not asking the right question, but like saving through investing instead of saving through
Yeah.
a savings account?
Well, as you work through the different, if you're looking at your short-term, if you're looking at your emergency fund, we would call it, where you've got your 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved just in case of an unknown development emergency coming up. You want that to be accessible, whereas your IRA or 401k, those are not accessible without penalty or cost, right? Legally speaking. Mm-hmm. So that you want your emergency savings to be accessible, and you also want it to be stable. So also in an IRA or a 401k or other type of longer term investment, you're very likely going to be having a bunch of stock funds in there. That's going to be more volatile. It could take a really big dive right when you need money, when you have your emergency and you need to take money out. So you don't want to invest your emergency fund that's there in case of something like job loss or a broken furnace or something like that. You don't want to invest that in stocks where they may have taken a really big dip right when you need the money.
Is there something in between though? There's a type of investment you can make that doesn't have penalties you take out, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So we call it a taxable investment account. That can be individual or joint, and that would be a place where you can. And again, you could put shorter term or longer term investments in that type of an account. So
but you still recommend having a savings account as well as that? Mm-hmm. Because it's easier to take out of that?
Not because it's easier to take out, but just because you need actual cash in the emergency savings. Cash these days, you can get high yield savings accounts that pay 4%, so it's pretty decent. It's more than inflation. But that's never going to lose value because it's cash. So that's where I would recommend keeping the 3 to 6 months.
Because there's a risk involved regardless. Like there's risk involved in that investment.
Yes.
Account, right?
Yes, and there's risk involved in every type of investment. I always like to point this out to people because sometimes people are like, well, my cash under my mattress, that's basically risk-free, right? My parents are one of the people that I have to tell this to all the time, so I've said it to them plenty of times, but they love cash under the mattress. The cash under the mattress is actually very risky because inflation is going to eat away at the ability of that cash to buy things. And if you leave it under the mattress for 20 years, you have lost a lot, actually. So every investment, including the cash under the mattress, has risks. Yes, you're exactly right. Yes?
It seems like this would be an area where there could just be so much anxiety because on the one hand, there's a lot to do and a lot to know, a lot you can't know when you're making these decisions, like inflation's out of our control, the stock market swings,
Yeah.
But in the same token, we have like scriptures that tell us trust God and like don't store up in storehouses. it just seems like it would be a really tricky landscape to navigate. Like, how much am I responsible, like kind of saving up and being wise?
Yeah.
And when does that become hoarding?
Yeah.
And, you know, it just,
Yeah.
so, like, any advice on how to think that through?
Yeah.
Like, just, you know, for those of us in the room who aren't financial planners and don't know all the things,
Yeah.
you know.
No, that's super good, and it is. I mean, part of the interesting thing, and this is part of why I think Jesus talked so much about money, is he knew it's central to our living existence here in this world, right? It's not like it's optional. It's not like we can just opt out of it. And it is a huge source of anxiety, right? And striking that balance between planning for the future, being like the ant who's the good example, you know, store up for the lean time, be prepared, plan ahead, all of that is, and you know, we see in the parable of the talents, the good stewards go out and they earn more. They earn more money with the money that's been entrusted to them. So there's plenty in Scripture about all of that. But then it also, money, you know, we're also warned against the love of money. We're warned against being obsessed with money. We're warned against having that be kind of our top priority and looking to money, like that verse we looked at last week from Ecclesiastes, looking to money as a shelter, as opposed to wisdom from the Lord as the shelter that will actually preserve us. So it's a constant growth process, I would say. And you're totally right. It's I think that's why we need to keep talking about it, and it's why Jesus talked about it so much, because he knew it was something we were going to be working on our entire lives, trying to find that balance. So yeah, I appreciate that. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, does anybody have a budgeting system that they're proud of, be it application or process that we could all learn from, perhaps?
I'd love to hear apps if you guys have good ones that you like to use. Mm-hmm.
I use Every Dollar.
Okay.
It does have an annual fee, but it's super easy to bucket where your expenses are going, and I value just like looking back. Like you can get your credit card summary of what you spent it in, but it's a better way to kind of combine all of your accounts and just put it.
It's called Every Dollar.
Every Dollar. It also remembers like if you have a merchant that you're frequently.
Okay.
It'll remember that, so it's a lot quicker instead of like.
So if you're like, how much do I spend on Amazon every month or whatever, it'll tell you. Okay.
Yeah, and you can build your own categories. It's pretty. I haven't exported from it. I don't know how good it is at that if you really want to crunch numbers, but at least
Nice.
as far as like getting a model or understanding of where every dollar is going, it's been helpful.
Does anyone else use that one or no? What one do you?
Tiller.
Tiller?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a plugin for Google Sheets that
Okay.
has a whole bunch of macros that basically kind of do similar things, maybe not as directed, but gets close to that ledger kind of style.
Nice. Yeah.
We use Bankativity. So for Mac, like for a while, we didn't have Quicken for Mac that was very good. And so we were using Quicken and then switched over to Bankativity, which is pretty good. It's got like some automatic syncing, but it's also could be a lot if you want something simpler. It might not be great, but
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I use super low tech, although spreadsheets are my love language, but just assign everything is what I have to do. You know, everything goes, and then what's left in that account is either what pays your Visa or your other discretionary, right? Because I don't want to have to stress about it.
Yeah.
So it just goes to the places.
Yeah.
It's simpler.
Yeah.
Lower stress.
So you're kind of using a similar, it's like what's left, that's my discretionary, I can go spend it on whatever I want. Or yeah. Yeah. That's kind of how I generally approach it as well. I tend to, you know, the paycheck comes in, I do the giving, I do the saving, and then what's left is sort of like, okay, that's what I have to go spend on what I want, you know, what I need. That generally tends to be how I approach it. Anyone else have any good apps to share? It's great to hear names because I don't do, I mean, what I generally work with my clients on is not budgeting at all, but sometimes people will come and ask like, so, you know, what apps do you recommend to use? And I'm always like, I'm not really sure what all's out there, so.
I have something that's not an app, but, so anyway, we kind of talked about it a little bit. My wife and I have very different family of origin backgrounds in our relationships with money. My family's much more open, her family's much more guarded, and just, yeah, they don't like talking about it. My
Yeah.
family's like, dinner time conversation.
Yeah.
So it's taken a lot for us, I think, over the years of our marriage to really like build some of the communication just between the two of us to get to a place where we can
Sure.
talk about it.
Yeah.
And you talked about some of it, I think, where it's like there's one person that's more interested, one person that's kind of annoyed by it.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Sometimes, and I think we've had to do a lot of work on just trying to get more connected, I think,
Yeah.
in communication work. So
Sure.
me being more type A, detail oriented, I've had to really back off and find other strategies than just going hard and fast with like a beautiful spreadsheet. That's where I love to live.
Yeah.
Colors,
Right.
it's formatted, it's great. There's formulas, stuff's happening. One thing we found really helpful was just to go back to like just get you a pad of sticky notes like you were trying to do with this with a partner. And as you're trying to build your buckets out of your 5 things, go ahead and just write out things that are priorities to you on the sticky notes. We got our kitchen table out and we just put sticky notes out of everything that we valued or wanted to achieve, or things we wanted to plan for. And that was really helpful because it was able to kind of take some of the pressure away to just say like, let's just brainstorm free thought of like what our expectations are for our life and where our money goes and how it's going to be allocated, whether we have that ability today or not.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I love that. One of the things I'll usually do first up when I start working with a financial planning client, especially if it's a couple, because that facilitating that communication is really important, is just encourage them to do some work with goal setting. And it doesn't only have to be financial, because finances are integrated into every element of our lives, obviously. So if you have goals, many people have goals that have, at first glance, nothing to do with money, but there is a financial element, right? So it's important, like let's say it's a social, I want to build out my friends network. Well, that often has a financial element, because a lot of times that means like, hey, let's meet up for dinner, and then we're going to a restaurant and we're paying, so there's even things that seem goals that don't seem to have anything to do with money often do. So it's really important to start out any sort of financial goal setting process with a bigger picture goal setting and communicating with each other about what's important to me, what's important to you. How do we speak openly about those things and then integrate those together so that we're on the same trajectory. So that's really key, and I totally love you guys did that with sticky notes. Like something about the physical writing them down, I think is actually really important. I mean, that's been proven even with research on the goal side, that if you physically write the goal down, you're more likely to work toward it. So I really like that.
The second piece of that is that once we got that established, I think still staying away from the hard and fast budgeting. Another way we found to build some of our communication and to ease into it is just to do like a cash. So again, it's a spreadsheet, I maintain it, but her obligation is basically just to record, we're just doing a cash flow. So record what is the balance in the different accounts, whether it's her student loan debts, credit cards, everything like that. And we've been doing like a family meeting on Sundays where it just takes 5 to 10 seconds, record what your bank balance is, put it in the spreadsheet, and then talk about it, whether it went up or down and kind of how that money went. We know what our expenses are. So it's been a good kind of way just to get a pulse on where our money's going and what our swings are. I think with some of the budgeting pieces, we're definitely overestimators. We're like, oh, we're definitely going to spend less on this and more on that. So I think that's really kind of helped level set, say like, oh no, this is the maximum we spent, this is the minimum we spent, and just to have that kind of like time stamp weekly or monthly or however you want to do it has been helpful for us to just ease someone who's not interested in going hard and fast in the budget into just saying, I'm creating general awareness for my money, where it's going, how much I have, what my debt obligations are, etc. So anyway.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. That's great. I really like that. And that kind of comes back to the assigning responsibilities thing that Blake was bringing up too, right? As you guys are working through just even on the practical side, on the record keeping, on the discussion, all of that, you're doing that as well. So that's great. All right, we're probably out of time here. Oh, I don't know, what are we at?
We're good.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming again today. And next week, I'm going to talk a little more about investing next week because I didn't quite get through all the notes on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the debt and giving elements as well. I have a sort of financial freedom path chart that I want to be able to hand out to everyone and talk through a little bit as well. So I'll bring that next week too. Everyone will get their own copy.